Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we're going to get you caught up on all the Ducks action this past week. A very rough week, Eddie, as the Ducks ended up losing all three games this week. They were without Ryan Getzlaf. He ended up going out on the IR before these games. We talked about the last podcast, how we thought the Ducks would do, and we weren't sure Getzlaf's status, and he was out, so that hurt the Ducks. But the Ducks ended up playing Toronto, Nashville, and San Jose this week, Eddie. And despite, losing these three games, they're all, tight scoring games. They ended up losing to Toronto 3-1, a game that, was close. The Ducks gave up the first goal, and then Cachet scored and tied it up in the first period. Then the Ducks gave up an early goal in the third period, and then ultimately, a late goal. And the Ducks lost this one 3-1, Eddie, as Gibson faced off against his old teammate, Frederik Andersen.
Yeah, it was a tight game. The Ducks had started to win a couple games, and Toronto had come into this game, I believe, on a mini losing streak, so they were looking to win one. And it was tight pretty much all game. Like you said, Connor Brown had the first goal for the Leafs, and Kazra scored one right after that. And then we didn't see much until the third period when Marleau got the go-ahead goal. And then obviously the last one wasn't technically an empty netter. It did count as a goal against for Gibson, but it was essentially an empty netter. He was on his way to the bench and didn't make it back in time. But yeah, it was definitely a disappointing loss. I think the Ducks... they did enough to win this game. They got a little bit unlucky in some departments, and they didn't make them pay on the power play. The Ducks had 4 chances on the power play to the Leafs 2, and they just couldn't get anything going. And that's been the theme this season for the Ducks on the power play. They just haven't been able to get pretty much anything going at all. So it's disappointing. I think it's a game they definitely could have won, and due to a couple faults, they ended up not getting even a point.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was tough. We had high hopes this week, and then unfortunately, as you all learned, that Getzlaf was out. So the Ducks, they ended up even in the shots in this game, 29 up. They did all right in the faceoff circle. They won 57% of the draws, and like you said, they just couldn't get it done on the power play. And you could tell without Getzlaf in there, that was a huge absence. The other play that came up in here and. Came up in this one, and it came up in the game against Nashville, Eddie. But Silfverberg had a goal in this one that was taken away. He turned his skate towards the net, and it was reviewed, and they determined that that distinct kicking motion came into play, so the goal was taken away. Otherwise, the Ducks might have come up with a point at least in this one. They might have at least forced overtime, Eddie, and gotten 1 point or possibly 2. So that was kind of frustrating. It's one of those rules. We've talked about a few of these this season as far as like challenging offsides. That was a big one that we talked about early in the season, and goalie interference too. You and I talked about that before the show and how that one's just ambiguous. And this is just another rule, Eddie, that we'll even talk about it more in the next game, unfortunately. But I just can't stand it. I just don't like the way. That there's just so much gray allowed for the refs to interpret this rule because it goes against the Ducks in this game, and then it goes against them when it's the other team turning their skate in the next game. So it's just kind of frustrating to see that happen, and then have it possibly determine whether the Ducks would have gotten a point in this game and the game against Nashville.
Yeah, and as much as I believe that they did get the right call in this game, I've never been a fan of this rule. I honestly don't understand why a player can't kick the puck into the net. And I get it. Then if they allow this, they've got to look at other things. Obviously if a guy punches the puck in the net, whatever. We saw Andrew Shaw head the puck in the net, and it got disallowed in a playoff game a couple years ago. But I just for a while now, I've thought, why does it really matter if he kicks the puck into the back? And there's so many issues with this rule. Like you said, there's a lot of gray area for the refs to make a decision. And there's a lot of speculation when it goes into it. In some games, a call it'll be the exact same play and it will go one way. In another game, it will go the other way. And it's been the same with goalie interference for the last few seasons, and it's been an issue and a topic for a lot of people to vent their frustration on. And in all honesty, I wouldn't mind if we saw this rule go away. Like I said, I think if you can kick the puck into the net, I don't see why it's such a big issue. The NHL is looking for any avenue to add goal scoring into the game, so why not be able to kick the puck in the back of the net?
Yeah, and I'm on the mindset that you're talking about. I mean, if you're going to get rid of it and not have this distinct kicking motion nonsense, which we know has been defined so many different ways over the years, and just allow players to do that. I mean, what's the big deal? And if the league doesn't want that, then fine, don't allow it then. But do something with this rule, because as we see in the next game, Nashville's first goal against the Ducks, it goes off Hartnell skating in. He turns his skate right towards the net, and it goes in, and he's skating towards the net. I mean, maybe he didn't move his leg as much as Silfverberg did, and that's why they allowed it. But it's pretty much the same play. So they get on the board with that one early. Yossi and Irwin score as well, and they build this 3-0 lead. The Ducks fought back in this one. They got some other goals, and they pull within one. But, they ultimately lost this one as Nashville got an empty net goal to win. But it's another game where with this call, the way it went, the Ducks possibly could have gotten a point out of this one too. They outshot Nashville. They won the faceoffs. They actually did get a power play goal in this one too. And so it's a little frustrating. The Ducks lost both these home games by, essentially one goal because the empty netters. And to see the kicking rule again applying this one, Eddie, and of course this time it goes against the Ducks. I remember I was sitting there and immediately saw the play, and I thought, okay, it's not going to count. And there was like hardly even a review too, which I know a lot of you out there had messaged me about that and were upset too. And I'm right there with you, because they spent so much time on the Silfverberg one, the 2 nights prior, and then this one there's like barely anything. And I did find out that they did review it. Maybe for 5 seconds, I don't know, but I guess it was actually reviewed. So, that was done, but it wasn't really as thorough as I think a lot of us would have liked, Eddie. But anyways, the Ducks unfortunately lost another game at home, and then they saw themselves drop down to 500 after this one.
Yeah, and really the stats are a bit deceiving in this game. I mean, at one point the Ducks were down 4-1, and it wasn't really for a late comeback that the stats are a little bit in the Ducks' favor. And the kicking motion in this play with Hartnell's goal, it's a little bit disappointing, but, unlike the Toronto game where it was a significant call late in the game, this was early on, and when you go down 4-1, it doesn't really have a significant impact on the outcome of the game, and I think the Ducks just got themselves in a hole early, and they couldn't get out of it. They made a good effort to try, and they got it within one goal, but when you go down 4-1 going into the third period, there's not much you can do. I mean, they did pretty much as they could, but it's tough, and really it's disappointing. We thought with 3 games at home, they'd be able to get a couple points, but coming out of a 3-game homestand and you only get 1 point, I mean, that's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I mean it's rough, that's what happened this week. Like you said, the Ducks, that first goal with the kicking, is unfortunate, and then they still got down 3-0, and then eventually 4-1 and had to battle back. Which that's been another problem with the Ducks we've seen this season, is they get down early in games and then they're trying to climb their way back. And I think in the past, when they've been the comeback kids, they've been able to do that. But right now, when you don't have Getzlaf and you don't have Eves, you don't have Kessler, you don't have Fowler. That's 4 pretty significant people you don't have. And, there's a lot of offense between those 4 players, too. You got to remember, especially as we saw from last season, how they were doing and obviously seasons prior. So when the Ducks get down early, by 2 or more goals, it's their chances of winning or scratching out a point significantly decrease. And, that's what we saw in this game. And, of course, the bitter rival Nashville from the playoffs last year as well. So the Ducks will still get to see him a couple more times this season, and we'll see what happens. The Ducks did get Bieksa back in this game, and he also played in the game against San Jose the next night, which, this game was disappointing. Miller win in net because it was the back-to-back situation. The Ducks had to take a quick road trip up to San Jose, and the Ducks did get outshot 45-26 in this game, but they held the 1-goal lead. Corey Perry got that one early in the game, and you thought maybe the Ducks were going to win this one 1-0, or maybe they'd get an empty netter and win 2-0. But Joe Ward got a late goal. Overtime, nobody scored, and then they went to the shootout, which we all know that Miller has been the best in the league with 58 wins in the shootout. And unfortunately, the Ducks ended up losing in the shootout 2-1. They scratched out a point, Eddie, but the way that they played in this game was, significantly better than the way that they had at least started the game against Nashville. And unfortunate that they only scratched out 1 point.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think they're a bit lucky to scratch at a point in this game, and it really came down to the play of Ryan Miller in this game. Again, his play in overtime really kept the Ducks going, and throughout the whole game, the Ducks played a solid game up until the Joe Ward goal, and there wasn't much you could really do on that one. It's hard to blame Miller. It was a 2-on-1. Vatanen got caught behind the play. Lindholm did pretty much as he could, jumped a little bit early on Joel Ward, and that left him open for the goal. And really, Ryan Miller was essentially perfect in this game, and it was disappointing to not see him get the win. I mean, the 2 games he's played in this season, he's been unbelievable. So it's great to have him come in and play that well. But when the Ducks can only muster up 1 goal and 26 shots in a home game, it's disappointing. And again, I mean, that's been the theme of this week. It was a disappointing week. We thought the Ducks could get a couple points at least from these games, and they really could have got at least a point from each game, but they just couldn't push over the finish line, at least against Nashville and Toronto, and they couldn't close it out in the shootout in this one.
Yeah, definitely. And when we talked about it in the last show, at that time, we thought, Getzlaf was still going to be playing. So that definitely changed things around, as you all saw in these last 3 games. Some significant stuff did happen with the Ducks playing in that San Jose game. There were 4 different milestones achieved in this game. Andrew Cogliano played in his 800th straight game. And mind you, that's all of the games he's played. He has not missed 1 game in the NHL, period. He's 4th all-time on the Ironman list. Corey Perry played in his 900th game, all as a Anaheim Duck. Grant played in his 100th NHL game, and then you had Coach Randy Carlyle coaching his 800th game, overall in his career. So some big stats there, Eddie. Stuff like that. But I know the Ducks still would have wanted 2 points out of this game.
Yeah, and speaking of Cogliano, it's insane for a guy to go his entire career not suffering even one small injury. I mean, we've seen Getzlaf go out twice this season so far with different injuries, and we've seen a multitude of guys go down. And for as long as Cogliano's been here, and for as long as he's been in the league, somehow he's escaped injury. Even the slightest injury, even a puck to the face, something you can't control, or rolling an ankle in the corner, or some kind of illness that makes you miss at least 1 game. I mean, it's just amazing the fact that he's played 800 straight games. It's something you don't see often, and you probably won't see for a long time.
Yeah, and for those of you, I know some people ask, they're like, well, who's got the record and how far? You've got Doug Yarvish, and he's got 964 games. So it's not going to happen this season. It's not going to happen next season. But, knock on wood, hopefully sometime 2 seasons from now, he will be all-time on the list. But that's where he's at. So he's sitting there at 164 behind him to tie Doug basically up. So that's where we're at on that. And like you said, it's just amazing the way that he's done it. And also he's one of the few players that's done it for their entire career. And actually so did Doug Yarvish too. He did it for his entire career as well. So crazy stats there for you. Another big game for him. He's been playing well this season, obviously in the absence of so many of the other players that we've talked about. So that happened on that night. That was the good news, I guess, all the milestones that the Ducks did achieve. But this game did raise some questions, Eddie. Of course, it's coming about the net and who should play in the next game. And we've got some fan questions. From Angel, he talks about Miller's play against the Sharks and if he should play against LA. Karen mentions that too, and a couple other people asked some of those questions. Well, what do you think? The Ducks are going into this week. They're going to play the Kings of Vancouver, Tampa Bay. Obviously, the schedule doesn't get any easier. Do you think Miller should play against the Kings or any of these other teams, I guess, in the next week or so?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I think, the 2 games he's played, he's been amazing. And, if you're going by play, I think he deserves to play. But that's not a knock on Gibson either. I mean, you look at Gibson's numbers and you wouldn't be able to really understand how much of a pivotal piece he's been for the Ducks this season. I mean, he saved them in so many games, even games they've lost. He's been their best player easily. So I think it's a little bit too early to say, look at 2 games that Ryan Miller's played and say, he should go in and now take starts away from John Gibson. I think Gibson should still start against the Kings. If this continues, I don't think Gibson's honestly played that bad. I think he's been very good and maybe every game he's played in except for 1. So I think he would have to play himself out of the starting role for Miller to take over and start games, other than back-to-backs. I don't really see Miller playing himself into that role, even if he won his next 2 decisions and played just as well. Like I said, I think Gibson would have to play his way out of it. He'd have to be bad in consecutive games or more than that for Miller to take over the starting job.
Yeah, I agree. I think Gibson's still the man. He's still going to, start most of these games. I do, like the way Miller's played. Obviously, it's only been 2 games. I did like in this game against San Jose the way he was as far as squaring off to the puck, and he seemed to just be really, really confident, which was good. But Gibson's been confident too. So I don't see Miller being the one that should start all these games and whatnot. I think Gibson is still the man. And unless he has a series of poor games, we've seen some of the games where he hasn't done as well, and it's not necessarily been him, as you talked about. I mean, the Ducks, finally got Vatanen and Lindholm back, so now the defense is a little bit better. But of course, Fowler went out, so there's a lot of factors going on there. So I think the Ducks will still go with Gibson against the Kings. They probably go with him against Vancouver and maybe Tampa Bay too. I don't know. They might put Miller in for one of those 2 games, but I think he's still going to be the one that starts. Obviously against the big game against LA, which, as you all know, LA has been doing really well. So this week's going to be a tough week coming up, Eddie. We know the Ducks did beat Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay to hand them their first home loss. Vancouver's been playing better than we expected. This is going to be a challenge. We don't know if Getzlaf's going to be back this week or not. He supposed to be some kind of update, which we didn't hear anything yet before the game against the Kings here. If they're going to take him off the IR or if he's going to be in it. So that's going to be a huge factor too. I'd like to see the Ducks win 2 out of 3 this week, but I think a lot of it depends on if Getzlaf's able to play.
Yeah, and I mean, he's arguably the Ducks' most important player, and we saw that this week when he was out of the lineup. They were really missing his presence, and this is arguably just as hard of a schedule coming up, if not harder, when you're looking at playing the Kings, who are one of the best teams in the Western Conference, and you're looking at playing the Lightning, who are one of the best teams, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the NHL this season. And again, you're also looking at Vancouver, who normally you look at last season, it would have been an easy game, but the way Travis Green has them playing this season, they're limiting a lot of quality chances against. They're really essentially parking the bus in a way, not an ugly way, not like New Jersey back in the early 2000s, but the new style of parking the bus. So it's going to be a tough game to go and play them as well. So hopefully we get some news about Getzlaf tomorrow and that he's either, if not ready to play tomorrow, ready to play for Vancouver and Tampa Bay, and then hopefully the injuries just stop from there on and we can start getting some guys back into the lineup. But yeah, I mean, the only advantage the Ducks have going for them this week are these games are all at home. And you got to start taking advantage of these home games. Obviously, they lost both last week. And you got to be good at home. If you're going to make the playoffs, if you're going to do well, you've got to be good at home, and it has to start somewhere. So hopefully they can play a strong game against the Kings. It's always a good one against the Kings. And if they can look back what they did well against Tampa the last time they played them, I think that'll serve them well on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, nothing like your crosstown rival coming to town, and they're playing well. So, there's always added motivation in these games anyways when we play LA. So hopefully the Ducks can, get this game and maybe build some momentum off of it and carry it into those next two games against Vancouver and Tampa Bay. Some of the things that, we talked about the Ducks have to work on. One of the biggest things is, special teams, Eddie, and we've got a couple of fan questions. Some people are talking about the amount of penalties that the Ducks take. Darren asked about that. Melissa asked about that, and we've got some stats for you. We talked about the teams in the NHL and who has taken the most penalties. You would probably think it was the Ducks, and I wouldn't tell you were wrong, but it's pretty close, Eddie. You've got Nashville leading the league here with 69 total penalties. Pittsburgh was 64, and then the Ducks was 60. So they're not the most, Eddie, but they're pretty damn close.
Yeah, Nashville and Pittsburgh are surprisingly leading the way. Maybe not as surprising for Nashville because that's the way they play. They're a team that plays on the edge. But for Pittsburgh being that high, it's certainly surprising. And then again, we all would have thought the Ducks would have been number one, but they are pretty close. And you look at who's benefiting or sorry, who's not benefiting, but who's hurting the most from the new rules for slashing. Well, it's the Ducks and over a third of their penalties are slashing penalties, and they're ranked number one in slashing penalties with 21 this season. So that's a big part of the reason that they're near the top in penalty minutes this season, or sorry, in minor penalties so far this season. So that's something that they can work on. I think it's a tough adjustment for anybody. Slashing penalties have gone up tremendously this season because of the change in the rule, and I think it's something that it's going to take some teams to get used to. So, you look at a team like Columbus, they've only taken 2 slashing penalties somehow this season. So there is a way to get around it, and I think it's going to take the Ducks some time. But yeah, it's something they do have to figure out. It's not like the penalty kill has been an issue this season. They're actually, I believe, about 85% on the penalty kill, which is good for around the top half of the league. So, it's not a bad thing. But when it comes to the power play, that's where the Ducks really have to start getting things going.
Yeah, and if you look at the stats on the power play, the Ducks have had 42 power play opportunities. They've only scored 5 times, which is tied for the bottom in the league. Columbus has only scored 5 times as well. They've had 1 more power play than the Ducks. So the Ducks are technically 30th in efficiency at 11.9, where Columbus is at 11.6. But in terms of scoring goals, Columbus and the Ducks are both tied for 5, which is the least on the power play. So that's been an issue. As we talked about, they're not getting as many screens. They're not getting in as many quality, secondary chances. Even 5-on-5, they're not getting as many. So the penalty kill, like you said, 85% has been, 5th in the league. So the Ducks are holding their own on that end, but they've got to get the power play going. Hopefully get Getzlaf back. Eves, we still haven't heard anything. He's back home, but we don't know, if the situation's been under control or not, or how long it's going to take. I hate to say, but we don't even know if he'd be back this season. I mean, that is an actual reality. He could be back in a couple of weeks, or who knows. So those are some things that are killing the Ducks on the power play. Obviously, Fowler out as well. Another issue too, Eddie, for the Ducks has been the number of shots that they've allowed against. You've kind of touched on a little bit here throughout the podcast, but if you look at the league, the Florida Panthers give up 37.4 shots per game. New Jersey gives up 35, and then the Ducks give up 34.7. Eddie, it's just unacceptable. You cannot give up almost 35 shots a game, and have the Ducks lean on Gibson and Miller to try and win. I mean, they've been pushed pretty good already in the games that they've played, and that's another thing that they're going to have to work on. They need to get in there and block those shots and not let the other team set up that forecheck for extended periods of time.
Yeah, and for a team who's been, the main talking point about the Ducks over the last few seasons has been how deep their defense is, how good their young defensemen are, this season, maybe it's not that they've been bad necessarily, but yeah, I mean, 37 shots per game is unacceptable. I mean, that's way, way too many shots to give up, and we've seen that in the games that John Gibson has played. I mean, some of the chances they give up too. It's not just they give up 37 shots and all the shots come from the perimeter. There are some very good scoring chances that they give up that they could prevent in almost every game, at least every game this season so far. And that's a big reason why they're losing games and that they're only 500. I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to improve, and obviously that comes with getting guys like Cam Fowler back and having some chemistry and having guys play on a pairing more than not switching every game. But it's something that they can work on, and hopefully they can get back to the way they used to play and limit shots against. But that coupled with the power play are things that are going to cripple them if they're going to try and move up the standings. These are things that have to get worked on, and the special teams were an issue last year. And it's tough with all these injuries. When we come back to, we talked about last week how the Ducks lead the league in men's games lost, and that's a big reason why the power play is so bad, and can obviously contribute to why the Ducks allow so many shots against. But at some point, you've got to stop blaming the injuries and use the depth that you have and get something going. I mean, we've heard a lot of people since the beginning of the season blame the fact that the Ducks don't get enough penalties for the reason their power play is so awful. But you look at a team like Dallas, who has less power play opportunities than Anaheim, and their power play percentage is 32.5. And yes, I know they have Ben and Sagan, Radulov, Klingberg, but there's no exception. You can look at other teams sitting around where the Ducks are. Minnesota has less power play opportunities. They've got 7 and 40. New Jersey is 25.6% and only 43 opportunities. Boston, Winnipeg, all above 20% with 1 or 2 more opportunities than the Ducks have. So at some point, you got to stop blaming the injuries and get something going.
Yeah, I agree, and part of it is getting traffic in front of the net. The Ducks haven't been doing that as much. We've seen Perry do it a little bit more this season, but overall, I think that's just been the issue. We've seen them sometimes pass the puck too many times, as we know. We've talked about that in seasons past, and they're just not getting that right positioning early on. Sometimes they can't get set up, and that's causing problems because obviously time chews away. And if you're not getting set up in the first 30 seconds of the power play, that's a problem. You should get set up right away and get it going. And we've seen it this time where they don't get set up in almost a minute. So that's something. It's got to change if they're going to prove that. One thing that did happen, Eddie, is I guess some good news, is we do know that Ryan Getzlaf, a.k.a. Big Bird, is skating again. So for those of you that missed it, which I'm pretty sure you didn't, with the Halloween, past us this last week, Ryan Getzlaf decided to show up to practice as Big Bird and has been skating a couple times a week. So it sounds like, from some of the things that I've been hearing, that he's going to come back before Christmas. Yeah, again, it's not official, but it sounds like he is on track to beat that timeline, Eddie, which, if that'll happen, then obviously that'll be a big addition to the Ducks specialty teams. Yeah,
and that will help them limit shots against as well. I mean, having that shutdown line was key for the Ducks all season last year. And at one point, I mean, they were the best offensive line for the Ducks, and that being Getzlaf, Cogliano, and Silfverberg. And I'm sure we'll see them get put back together, and hopefully that helps. Silfverberg's been better this week, but hopefully that can help him get things going offensively as well. But yeah, that's going to be a key piece. He's always been a key piece of this team since the Ducks acquired him, and getting him back in the lineup and having him and Getzlaf as your 1 and 2 centers. I mean, it's going to make a huge difference. It goes without saying. I mean, it's hard for any team to lose their top 2 centers and try and win games without them. And the Ducks have done admirably well to stay above 500 and missing Getzlaf for about half the games and missing Getzlaf since the beginning of the season. So getting him back and as soon as possible is going to be very important for the Ducks.
Yeah, and we talked about it too, as far as the Ducks' record, 6-6-2. They're still 500 despite all the stuff that's gone on. So there's still hope. Like I said, I think Getzlaf hopefully will be back soon. Looks like Kessler's going to be back faster. Fowler's still out a few weeks, and then we just don't know about Eves. That's the big question mark. So with all that, the Ducks didn't really make any moves lately. They did send Berra back down to San Diego, Eddie, which we kind of expected once Miller came back. And, we kept talking about, hey, are the Ducks going to make a trade? Are they going to do anything? Obviously, with Eves on the LTIR, they had more cap space. They've had about $4 or $5 million, depending on the day of the week, obviously, because it's always calculated. And the Ducks didn't make a trade. But some other team made a trade with a player that you all know that we've talked about. We thought maybe there were rumors that the Ducks were in on this, and of course, I'm talking about Matt Duchene. And we all get surprised, Eddie, this past weekend. A trade comes out with him. It involves obviously Colorado, but it involves two other teams, Ottawa and Nashville. And the trade happened during a game. So a lot happened. There's a little bit of confusion. I know when we heard about it, we were like, what is going on here? Who traded what to where? And I'll let you break it down. Obviously, this essentially was kind of like a two-part trade. Basically, some stuff had to be moved in order to make, the big move with Matt Duchene. But break it down as far as who got what and how it all worked out, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, it was more so interesting because the night before we had a report that came out saying there was a trade that had failed between the same three teams that involved Turris and Duchene. And it failed because Nashville wasn't willing to give up Matthias Ekholm to Colorado in the deal. And then from there, I thought it was dead, and we probably wouldn't see anything for a while. And then, of course, I mean, the trade is done the next day. And yeah, it's an interesting one. We don't see three-team trades that often, especially surrounding two very good players like Matt Duchene and Kyle Turris. But you see Colorado, I mean, Sakic gets paid off for being patient and waiting on trading Duchene. I mean, the haul he's able to bring in on this deal is insane. So it kind of breaks down like this. So Ottawa ends up getting Matt Duchene, and that's it. Nashville ends up getting Kyle Turris, and that's it. Ottawa gives up to Colorado Shane Bowers, who was their first-round pick last year, as a late first-round pick, I believe around 28th or 27th overall. Their goaltender Andrew Hammond, who they've been trying to get rid of for a while now, their first-round pick from this season, and their third-round pick from this season. I believe also the first-round pick is top 10 protected, so they don't have to worry about that. And then Nashville gives up their second-round pick this year, prospect Vladislav Kamenev from their AHL affiliate, and Sammy Girard, who has been one of the top defensive prospects in the league and is arguably their best defensive prospect. But with the depth they have, they're able to give this up, and it's just an interesting trade all around. I mean, it's hard to tell who gave up what for where when you're looking at it, but it all works out in the end. And I mean, if anybody was the winner in this trade, I think it has to be Colorado. What they are able to get in this deal, it remains to be seen what they get for that first, second, and third round pick in this year's upcoming draft. But even just the prospects that they're able to get for this is a very good haul. And I think if you have to pick winners, I think after that you got to look at Nashville being able to acquire a center of Kyle Turris' caliber, and now it's you look at the three centers they have. They've got Ryan Johansson as their number one. They've got Kyle Turris as their number two, and then they've got Nick Bonino as their number three. So I mean, they've got arguably some of the best center depth in the NHL now. So that's important for them. And then you look at the Senators. I don't want to call them losers in this deal. I know Pierre Dorion has wanted Matt Duchene for a long time. I mean, he's almost pretty much publicly stated that. The only issue I have here is I don't think Matt Duchene is a massive upgrade on Kyle Turris. I think he is a better player, and I think once he can get back to playing the way he did 3 or 4 seasons ago, if he gets into the right system and if Ottawa is a good fit for him, then Ottawa will be more than happy. But for what they gave up, essentially 2 first-round picks, because Shane Bowers was a first-round pick last year, a third-round pick. It's tough to judge it right now. But, if Matt Duchene can get to playing the way he did, back in 2012, 2013, 2014, he's a 70, 80-point potential player. And if he can do that, in Ottawa, where he's going to be a number one center, most likely playing with guys like Mike Hoffman and Mark Stone, this is going to be a great trade for the Senators. So just an interesting day all around, to finally see this saga end and to have it be with 3 different teams, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this was anticipated for a long time. We had talked about this last season. We had talked about it in the summertime. We were like, Matt Duchene, where's he going to go? Trade deadline. Oh, summertime. Matt Duchene, where's he going to go? And finally, it's over. I mean, obviously, the Ducks didn't get him, which is unfortunate. I was a little surprised, too, Eddie. I mean, the way Sakic put it out there, I mean, he wanted a lot for Duchene. And, like you said, he held out. He got what he wanted. if you look at these three teams like you talked about, I obviously think Colorado made out. I mean, yet to be seen with these draft picks and whatnot, but I mean, they just get a boatload for Duchene. And like you said, Nashville's now got, three good centers. Obviously, our favorite, Johansson's there, with our other real favorite, former Duck Bonino, and of course Kyle Turris. So Nashville got a little bit scarier, which is not good for us. I mean, they're not in the same division, but they are in the conference. So that's going to be a little bit of a battle there. And then Ottawa, as you said, not really a loser, but if you had to pick of the three, they got an upgrade, but how much of it is there? And I think a lot of it's going to depend on Matt Duchene and what kind of motivation he's going to have. And what's going to be interesting, Eddie, is this week Colorado plays Ottawa on Friday. So it's going to be interesting to see how that game shapes up. I think that's one that a lot of people are going to want to watch as he plays his former team, just a few days after this trade. So that was the big trade, I guess, one that we kind of anticipated. What did you think about the trade actually being made during the game and then pulling him off the ice? Did you think it was, anything? Did you think that was a negative, or do you think that Matt Duchene kind of, since he'd been wanting a trade, he kind of asked for it? Or, I've seen all kinds of different opinions. I'm kind of curious what you thought about it being done during the actual game that Colorado was playing.
What it seems like is, I can only speculate, but I don't think they had any intention of making a deal going into the start of the game. Otherwise, Matt Duchene wouldn't even been in the lineup. I think the deal must have come together early on in the first period. And then they finalized the deal and pulled him out of the game. I mean, if you're the Senators, you definitely don't want him playing the rest of that game and potentially getting injured. And if you're the Colorado Avalanche, you definitely don't want him getting injured with the haul that you're about to make. And even, Nashville as well don't want him getting injured because then they don't get Kyle Turris. So, I can only speculate, like I said, but I think that's, in my opinion, that's what happened, is that the deal really came together in the first period. They probably didn't know, or I didn't have any idea that it was going to be completed, at that time. That's why he wasn't left out of the game in general. But it is an interesting situation. You don't see it happen too often where a player is pulled out of the game and then instantly traded. So it was interesting to see. And like you mentioned, with Ottawa going to Stockholm and playing back-to-back Friday, Saturday against Colorado, it's funny how things work out that, Matt Duchene's first game as a Senator is going to be against his first team and his favorite team. He's been a Colorado Avalanche fan since he was a kid, so it's going to be funny to see how that works out, and it's definitely a must watch. You look at Eric Johnson's comments about Duchene leaving and pretty much saying he didn't want to be here, so there's nothing really to talk about. It'll be interesting to see how that game works out.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to Duchene's motivation being on a new team, and just going from there. I mean, it's going to be a fun situation to watch as they play out the rest of the season. Basically, what did you think? Some Duck fans out there a little bit upset, thought maybe the Ducks should have tried to get him. There were some people mentioning that how Vatanen was the center of trade rumors before, and some people have thrown out that Vatanen maybe should have gone with, maybe a couple draft picks or whatnot for Duchene. Do you think that the Ducks missed out on this one? Do you think that they could have made some kind of offer to get him? Obviously, they had Eves on the LTR, and they would have, had to work some things out later on if they were able to make some kind of deal. But do you think the Ducks should have really pushed harder for this one, or do you think it was better that the Ducks just are, doing what they're doing?
The only way I think the Ducks could have made this deal work is if they would have had to been into a similar position as the Nashville Predators and what the Nashville Predators gave up. I don't think they ever would have given up a first round pick. They didn't have one last year, but giving up a player they drafted in the first round plus a first round pick this year plus a third round pick as well. The Ducks don't like to deal that many draft picks in general. And then to add, the Ducks can't even add a guy like Duchene and salary cap, so it would have been a guy like Vatanen to move, and the fact that Vatanen is still here, there's obviously a reason he hasn't been traded, and I think the only way this deal really works for the Ducks is, one, they would have had to move cap space, which is very difficult, and two, they would have still had to have a guy like Shea Theodore that they could move. Nashville had Sammy Girard in their system, who played a couple games this season. He's been pretty good, but there was no way he was really going to ever move in front of Roman Josi, Matthias Ekholm, Ryan Ellis, and PK Subban. And it's not worth it for them to have a guy like that, an asset like that, playing on their bottom pairing. So to move him and get to Kyle Turris was huge for them. And I just don't think the Ducks really had the assets or the cap space to make this trade work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think it would have worked out. And if they would have somehow, Murray would have worked some kind of magic and done something, it would have caused other problems, because the Ducks would have had to have done something either when Eaves comes back or at the trade deadline. Something would have had to, eventually it would have came to a head, and they would have had to try to figure out something. And with all the other big contracts they have with Parrott, Getzlaf, Kessler, Vatanen, Lindholm, etc. Even Josh Manson getting his bigger deal and all these things going on. I just don't see the math working out there without the Ducks having to give up some players and then trying to figure out each situation. I think it would have been too much of a mess. So, if you feel like the Ducks missed out on this one, Eddie and I are here to tell you we don't really think the Ducks did miss out at all. Obviously, with all the injuries, it's not easy to say that, but I mean, that's just it. We didn't anticipate these injuries. Nobody did. So, the Ducks are still 500. They're still going to fight it out. Like we said, Getzlaf is going to be back soon. Hopefully, Kessler is going to be back sooner than the holidays. That's kind of the word on the street. Obviously, nothing official yet, but that's what we're hearing. So, I think better times are ahead for the Ducks. They did have a little bit of a rough week, as Eddie and I talked about, but they also only lost those games all really by one goal. As we talked about, a couple empty netter goals, and they really could have even had a couple extra points if it wasn't for our favorite rule, the stick kicking motion rule, which we both love so much, as we talked about on the show. So, just look for the Ducks this week. Hopefully Getzlaf comes back. Like we said, they're going to play the Kings, Vancouver, and Tampa Bay. And if they can do some of the things you and I talked about, Eddie, as far as the power play and hopefully limiting the other team's shots, that's a big key. Then I think the Ducks can at least hopefully pull out a few points in these games. And they got a big homestand, Eddie. I mean, you look at the schedule. As we said, they've got the Kings, Vancouver, and Tampa Bay. After that, they've got Boston and then Florida, which that's going to be a big game. Obviously, Teemu Selanne and Paul Kariya are going to be honored that night before the game, so make sure you get to the game on the 19th early. Then the Ducks, it's kind of weird, Eddie. They have that short, turnaround. They go up to San Jose and they come back, and then they've got Vegas and Winnipeg. So, it's crazy. The Ducks are going to have 7 of the next 8 games at home. So, I mean, these are some big games coming up. Like we said, they've got added motivation against the Kings. They're going to have some added motivation. Florida embarrassed them earlier this year, and they're going to have that ceremony for Selanne and Kariya. So there's going to be, some games here where, they need to pull some points together.
Yeah, and really with all these games being at home, you can't do what you did last week. You can't come in and get, one out of the possible 6 points that they could have got. You've got to come into this and think, with 7 of these next 8 at home, that's where most of your points are going to come from at the end of the season is home wins. So it's important for the Ducks not only to do well this week, but to do well on that homestand. And if you've got 7 at home, you're expected to win at least 4 or 5 of those games, and that will significantly impact the Ducks' standings in the Western Conference and the Pacific Division. But it remains to be seen. We don't know if Getzlaf's going to be back. We don't know if anybody else is going to be back within that time. Probably not. I don't really see Fowler or Kessler being back in that time, and obviously Eaves. We have no idea when he's going to come back, most likely long term. So the Ducks are going to have to pull things together. We've got guys like Grant and Wagner and Cashew who continue to put up points, so they're going to have to keep doing that. And once we get Getzlaf back, hopefully he can start getting things going and moving the Ducks in the right direction.
And with that, we'll wrap up the show. We'll be back in about a week. Look for us to have another one after the Tampa Bay game. And, we'll keep you covered. Obviously, as news comes out, we'll post it either in an article or on social media. And with that, let's go Ducks.